So Pat over at the Ground Zero Salem YouTube channel is having a bit of a thread response contest. This one on evolving opinions on albums. Basically albums that you liked when you were young but don't like now, or vice versa. So I'm going to go through a bunch of my records. I'm going to talk about how and why my opinions on them have changed. I got some classic metal albums here. Some of these might surprise you that I liked and don't like anymore, or the other way around. So you know what? Stick around. So I've definitely changed my mind on certain albums that I've otherwise either loved or hated in the past. I think a lot of it comes down to age. I've been a metal fan for almost 40 years. I've had plenty of time to spend with some of this music. And I think what happens is that as you get older, your tastes change a little bit. Your expectations on what an album is regarding it being good or bad change quite a bit. So I think that factors in quite a bit. I also know that when I was a teenager, I wasn't as critical with music as I am now. I think as long as it was loud, fast, and thrashing, I was really excited about it. And now I hear some of those albums, and I'm like, wait, you kind of see the cracks in the seams, musically and lyrically, especially with a lot of albums. So I think that factors in as well. When I was a kid, I probably fell into a little bit of groupthink. I think some of us did as teenagers in general, in metal or other genres, where here are the popular albums and here are the albums you're told that these suck and you shouldn't like them. And I feel like maybe I fell into a little bit of that when I was 16, 17 years old. And I mean, I have to admit that. I think some of you probably should admit it too, by the way. But that's gone. I mean, you get older and you just don't care about any of that stuff. You know, you become your own person and you grow up, essentially. So I think that falls into the music thing as well. So let's talk about some classic metal albums that I feel very differently about now, in either direction. First up is Rainbow with their second album, Rising, came out in 1976. Of course, featuring the vocalist Ronnie James Dio, the classic Rainbow lineup, also Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Bain, Tony Carey, and Cozy Powell. In fact, here they are in the gatefold, looking very young, like we all did once. So Rainbow, I discovered Rainbow a little bit late. I have to admit that my introduction to any music with Ronnie James Dio was through his solo band, simply called Dio. I discovered them in 1984 when The Last in Line came out. Then I went back for Holy Diver. I was also really slow to the Dio era Black Sabbath. I had Live Evil, probably in 1985, 86. Thought it was okay. Didn't really think at the time Dio really pulled off Ozzy era Black Sabbath songs. I think he did better on his own songs. And then Rainbow is probably in the 90s sometime. I can't remember who really introduced me to Rainbow or how I really stumbled onto it. I think my buddy Bill M. might have something to do with it because I know he loves this band. But I wasn't paying attention to Rainbow at all in the 1980s. I think a lot of that was probably because I thought Rainbow was kind of my parents' band, you know, that's old stuff. Why would I want to hear that? They have keyboards. Why would I want to hear that? All of that stuff. It's funny that I was okay with Black Sabbath, and that's old music too, even by 1980s standards, but I wasn't having it with Rainbow. Maybe also the name Rainbow is a little bit fey, to use a word. I mean, rainbows. Is that metal? And of course, this band isn't strictly metal. I mean, they are kind of a hard rock band. They are proto-metal in a lot of ways. I also think they're proto-power metal. I think a combination of Rainbow and Judas Priest, those two bands really brought some of that, especially to U.S. power metal. But a really cool band. I really did change my mind on them, and I'm kind of wondering what did it for me. Some great songs here. I think Stargazer is the best song on here. Really amazing song. I love Run with the Wolf as well. Just an amazing little record. Yeah, not much more to say about it. In fact, here's the cover again. Oh, by the way, Ken Kelly did the cover. This is the guy who Kiss Destroyer and Love Gun and all that stuff. Yeah. Fistful of Rainbow. I don't know. Is it masculine? I don't even know. But there it is. Rainbow with Rising. Speaking of Black Sabbath, here we are with Born Again. Came out in 1983. This is the one and only album with vocalist Ian Gillan, formerly of Deep Purple, later of Deep Purple, and other things as well. I think the big problem with this album initially, first of all, I was never really a big Deep Purple fan. I know a lot of people call this Purple Sabbath. Later on, as I listened to this album a little bit more, I heard less and less of that. I think people are just making that connotation with Ian Gillan. Because this is a Black Sabbath album, and I think I grew to sort of understand it more being a Black Sabbath album later on in life. Initially, though, aside from Zero the Hero, I really liked nothing on this album. I remember my buddy Mike back in December of 1983 introduced me to this record, and we're going to talk about him later because there's another album in the stack that he introduced me to. But I was like, yeah, Zero the Hero is kind of cool. I like that sort of driving, kind of doomy riff, but nothing else connected with me. But years later, I ended up loving the entire first side. I think Trashed is amazing. I love Stonehenge. I think Disturbing the Priest is probably my new favorite song on this album. And even on the B-side, I love Hotline. It's a great song. Fantastic. The artwork, too, might have put me off as a kid. Later on, I kind of got to liking it a bit more. It's kind of oddball and all of that. But again, I think people give this album a little bit of crap because it's not Ozzy, it's not Dio. I think fans back then were probably just like, we're tired of switch-out vocalists at this point. I don't know. And maybe they just wanted Ian Gillan and Deep Purple. I really don't know. But it took me a number of years to really like this album. Now I appreciate it quite a bit. Even the production doesn't bug me so much as maybe it did back then. It was a bit fuzzy and a bit kind of muffly in some ways. But now it's a fantastic little record. I know people consider this a bit of a dark horse album. I don't as much anymore. So there it is. Black Sabbath, Born Again. Next up is Death Angel with their second album entitled Frolic Through the Parks. Came out in 1988. In fact, I remember buying this on cassette at a strip mall in Pasadena when it came out. Don't know why I remember that. So my history with this band, I came in on the Ultraviolence when it was brand new, their first album. Love that album. It is a thrash classic. Every song is amazing. The album after this, of course, is Act 3. It's a little more mature. Musically, they do some different stuff, but nothing too far out of their own ballpark. This album is a little bit of an anomaly, I think, sandwiched in between those two. Initially, when I got this album, I really did like it quite a bit. I think I was just hungry for more Death Angel because I thought so highly of the Ultraviolence. But now that I hear this album decades later, I'm pretty bored with it. In fact, there's a song called Bored on here, which encapsulates how I feel about this album, more or less. I think a lot of what's going on here is they're kind of trying to show off a little bit. This, the time signature changes and adding some other elements into it. It's still thrashy to an extent, but I just musically don't gravitate to this album. It's definitely not a go-to album for me. I do find it rather strange that some of these songs just don't hold up for me anymore. There's a cover of Cold Gin on here. It's a Kiss song. I probably thought that was really cool. Kiss, my favorite band. Wow. And now I hear it and I'm just like, this is an awful cover song. Terrible. There's some other stuff that's okay, I guess. I like Why You Do This was probably my favorite at the time. It's fine. Guilty of Innocence is a decent song, but again, I just think that there's just a lot going on here that I just don't connect with at all. And again, this isn't a go-to album for me. I'd rather hear Act 3 or the Ultraviolence than this album. I know there are fans of this album. Sorry, but there it is. Anyways, Death Angel, Frolic Through the Park. That's it. Next up is the 1980 debut album from Def Leppard. This is On Through the Night. My history with this band is pretty simple. I discovered Pyromania when it was brand new back in, early 1983. I was 14 years old. Really excited about that album. I remember riding through my neighborhood, my BMX bicycle. I had my boombox bungee corded to the front of the handlebars and just blasted it through the neighborhood, annoying everyone with it. Very excited about Def Leppard at that time. So what happened was this is when I moved to Worcester, Mass. I moved back there, rather. And my buddy Mike and I were hanging out, and he had this album. He loved this album. He thought it was the greatest thing ever. This cover, by the way, looks like a country western album with the semi and the record. I thought that initially as well when I saw it. So he puts it on, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I hated it instantly. Hated everything about it. I think some of that was based on my enthusiasm for how Pyromania sounded. I didn't want to hear anything else because I was a teenager, and I wasn't having it. So it took me a long time to actually warm up to this record. In fact, I remember it was somewhere in the 90s. And I know what did it. It was actually the song Rocks Off. And it wasn't this version of it. Rather, it was the version on this compilation, the New Wave of British Heavy Metal 79 Revisited. This was released in, I think, 91. Lars Ulrich of Metallica was responsible for this, as well as Jeff Barton. Jeff Barton was, I think, with Kerrang! Magazine or Sounds. I can't remember which. And this is amazing, by the way. Tons of cool Nawabum bands. You should probably get this record. This is the British version with a Thunderstick covered for some unknown reason. Don't know why. But getting back to this little record, amazing songs on here. It opens with Rock Brigade. I probably would have opened with Hello America instead. I would have swapped the first two songs, but pretty cool. One thing I thought was interesting when I first heard Rock Brigade later in the 90s was that the opening riff really sounds like a Kiss riff, like something Paul Stanley would have written. Next time you hear that song, kind of think about that, because it's pretty true. Wasted is a great song. I don't know why I didn't love that song immediately. There's some other great stuff on here too. Answer to the Master's fun. The version of Rocks Off on here I like even more now. Yeah, amazing little album. And something it really took me a while to appreciate, but now I do. And it's great. And then I went and bought High and Dry as well, and that blew me away as well. So there you go. Def Leppard, On Through the Night. Next up is the 1984 debut EP from Hellhammer. This is Apocalyptic Raids. Amazing cover, I guess. So I bought this album when it was relatively brand new. In fact, so did my buddy Eric, who I'm going to talk about soon because he factors into the story pretty heavily. This is the precursor to Celtic Frost, of course. Tom G. Warrior and Martin Ainer in this band. This does not sound quite like Celtic Frost. Celtic Frost is a much, much better version of Hellhammer, if you want to put it that way. I remember I didn't hate this album so much. The critics really hated this album, roundly dismissed it. But I did find a capacity of ridicule and mocking for this album quite a bit. In fact, my buddy Eric and I, on more than a few occasions, I remember we would imbibe substances. I know psychedelics figured their way into it for some reason. And we would put on Triumph of Death specifically. It's the first song on side 2. And blast it and wait for the scream, because it goes into this riff for a while. And then Tom lets out this blood-curdling scream that's just amazing and unbelievable. And we would just explode in laughter. Like fall on the floor, clutch your gut. Painful laughter, like you feel like you're gonna die. It hurts so much. And we did this a few times, I remember, throughout the couple of years after this came out. And that's my initial opinion of this album. It's kind of ridiculous. This is an original Noise Records release. I believe it's a top loader, which is really strange. If you know about why that is, you should let me know in the comments, because I found nothing about that. I did warm up to this after, but it really took me becoming a Celtic Frost fan to do that. Celtic Frost is an amazing band. To Megatherion is a classic. Many years of being a fan of that band, I went back to Hellhammer. And while I don't think this album is amazing by any stretch of the means, I do appreciate it quite a bit more. Even though every time I hear Triumph of Death and the scream kicks in, I can't help but laugh a little bit. It's just built in now at this point. Can't avoid it. But yeah, Hellhammer, Apocalyptic Raids. Is it fantastic? No, but it's not so bad, I guess. Next up is Judas Priest with the 1981 release of Point of Entry. This is definitely a very mainstream, radio-ready kind of album. It's sandwiched between two really killer Judas Priest albums. We got British Steel on one side, and then we've got Screaming for Vengeance after this. I didn't discover the band on this album. I bought Defenders of the Faith and Screaming for Vengeance when Defenders was brand new back in 1984. Then I went back in the catalog. My buddy Eric had this album, and I heard it probably through him. Really didn't like it. I definitely found it wasn't a go-to album at all. I mean, I liked Heading Out to the Highway, but nothing else. Oh, by the way, this is the UK cover, obviously. I do have the US cover as well. I've shown it a zillion times, but I'm showing this one now, just because. Again, Heading Out to the Highway, decent song, but since the years, I have enjoyed other songs. I really do love Hot Rockin', in part because of the ridiculous music video. I mean, the working out scene in the sauna and all of that. Everything's on fire, which is kind of cool, but also a bit of a metaphor considering Rob Halford's in the band. I mean, everything's flaming, right? There's that. Desert Plains, I really grew to appreciate in later years. I don't know why I didn't like it back then. Not really a big fan of You Say Yes. I still think it's kind of the odd man out in this album. Don't Go's okay. I feel 50-50 about it. Sometimes I'm in the mood for it. Sometimes I'm not. But it's a decent little record. I think it's an album I didn't give a chance to at all in the 80s. And I wasn't going to because it wasn't metal, and I was a teenager and that's all I wanted to hear. So I was going to ignore this anyways back then. But now it's not so bad. I do enjoy it on occasion. So there it is. Judas Priest. Point of Entry. Next up is the 5th studio album from Manowar. This is Fighting the World. Came out in 1987. This isn't my first Manowar album. I came in on Into Glory Ride when it was maybe a year old at that point. I remember buying Sign of the Hammer soon after that, and I went back for Battle Hymns. So I was a pretty big Manowar fan. I loved Gloves of Metal. I thought that was a great song as a kid. So when this came out, this is their major label debut, by the way. It's on Atco, a division of Atlantic. I was pretty excited about it. I did like this album a bit when it came out. I think, again, my enthusiasm for Manowar at the time as a teenager helped that along a little bit. But again, over the decades, you listen to an album like this again, and you're like, I don't know. There's some cheese going on here that I didn't catch before, and I don't know why. We need to talk about Blow Your Speakers, which is an awful song. It's terrible. The music video is actually cringier than the song itself. I don't know if you've ever seen it. You should probably check it out after you watch this video. It's pretty bad. Like, you'll sit back going, ugh, awful. The title track is fine. Carry On's kind of lost its luster. I still say Black Wind, Fire, and Steel is the best song on this album. There is a version of Defender on here that isn't the one I was used to. I bought the single that came out a few years before. I think it was 1984. Orson Welles does a talk part in that as well. It's a different take. It's a different performance of Defender. And I really got used to the single version a lot. So I don't like this version as much for some reason. Also, Ken Kelly did the cover of this, interestingly enough, and it looks just like Destroyer. I don't know. Manowar was like, make it look exactly like Destroyer, except make it look like Manowar. I don't know why that was really a thing, but it's okay. Again, this isn't a go-to Manowar album for me at all. Drums of Doom is kind of unnecessary. Violence and Bloodshed is so-so. Violence and Bloodshed does remind me of something, though, in that the thing about Manowar, especially 80s Manowar, because they don't listen to the stuff after Triumph of Steel, is that I only want Manowar to do the whole, like, Conan Warrior shtick. When they start singing about Vietnam and motorcycles and crap, I don't want to hear it. I want them to stay in character. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. It takes me out of the fantasy, if you will, of what they're trying to sing about and do and affect and all that. So, yeah, I hate when they do that. So I tend to skip songs that do that, and Violence and Bloodshed is really one of those songs that I just skip. Bad lyrics, too, by the way. Manowar has a number of bad lyrics to their credit, of course. Also something you notice later on in life. Maybe as a teenager, you're like, hey, this is cool. And later you're like, phew. So anyways, Manowar. Fighting the World. It's okay. Again, a go-to album for me would probably be like Hail to England. I love that album still, despite its production. So there it is. Fighting the World. Sure. Next is the 4th studio album for Ozzy Osbourne. This is The Ultimate Sin, released in 1986. Yeah, this is Ozzy's glam metal album. I know a lot of people don't want to face that, but that's exactly what it is. And it's not just because he wears sequins and has the mussy up, bleached blonde hair in his videos. It really has that sound. I don't know if that's in no small part to having Jake E. Lee in the band, who incidentally is the best thing on this album. If you want to hear Jake E. Lee, listen to Ultimate Sin. Maybe listen to Bark at the Moon too. So I really liked this album when it was new, but I hate it now. I really can't stand it. Fool Like You is okay maybe, but Thank God for the Bomb is cringy like you wouldn't believe. Shot in the Dark is a little too poppy. Ultimate Sin's Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Killer of Giants either. Yeah, there's just a lot of just meh stuff on this album. Cover's kind of okay, though, I guess. Sure, why not? I don't have a lot to say about The Ultimate Sin. This is really where I leave off with Ozzy, for sure. I don't really listen to much going forward. In fact, the older I get, the less Ozzy Osbourne albums I like. In fact, if we really whittle it down, it's really the first 2 albums for me. Those are the ones I feel strongest about, and Bark at the Moon is fine. I don't find myself coming to this album much at all. Rarely, I would say. But yeah. And I did like this album quite a bit as a kid. I was probably about 17 when it came out. And but not anymore. That's it. Maybe the cover and Jakey Lee are the best things on this album. He's amazing on this record, by the way. It's kind of interesting. I always think of like Jakey Lee is the ultimate sin, with Bruce Kulick is to Crazy Nights. You could make that comparison as well between those 2 albums. But yeah. Anyways, the ultimate sin, Ozzy, meh. And that's my response to Ground Zero Salem's Evolving Opinions contest. You should definitely check out Pat's channel. Check out the original video that he made for this contest. I'll link that in the description of this video. Pat's channel is actually pretty cool. He covers a lot of extreme metal, but he covers also hardcore and punk. I'm kind of reminded that back in the 80s, I also dug a lot of hardcore punk stuff. So I watch Pat's channel, and he talks about, Black Flag or Poison Idea or Clown Alley, or all those bands I kind of forgot about. I get excited. I'm like, hey, I remember those bands. Mostly because pattern recognition for me is really cool. I don't know. But you should definitely check out his channel. Subscribe to it, of course, as well. That's what you should do. You know that. Of course, I'm also going to tell you that if you like this particular topic, I do cover it a bit in more depth in my show, Do I Still Hate? Which is kind of self-explanatory. I take one album from my past and see if I still hate it. You should definitely check that playlist out. It's at my channel. Go there after this video. You only have so many more seconds anyways to hang out for this, so there you go. And speaking of my channel, this is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting. I also cover classic and modern metal bands in general. If that sounds like something you dig, you should definitely subscribe to this channel. But while you're at it, maybe like this video. Maybe share it with some friends. That'd be cool. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.